Sana.
Right. Well, welcome everybody here to our webinar here for modernizing your applications, all brought to you by a fantastic Microsoft partner. The Lunavi team is here with us today, specifically Madison we have from Lunavi. Super happy everybody could join us today. We're going to give everybody just a few more minutes to kind of make their way in, just in case they're, wrapping up another meeting, what have you. So I really appreciate everybody's attendance today. We'll dive in here to some great concepts here as far as really getting you ready to understand what it's going to take to, migrate that application, modernize that application, whatever you are looking to do. There are several options here in the Microsoft ecosystem. So really happy to go ahead and break that down here for you today. So appreciate everybody being here. We'll get started here in just a moment. All right, everybody. I say it's time to go ahead and get this show on the road as everyone else starts making their way in. So welcome here to our app modernization seminar here today, sponsored by a fantastic Microsoft partner. We have Lunavi here with us, specifically Madison here from Lunavi, which I'm going to go ahead now, Madison, and give you a chance to welcome all these wonderful people here today. So go ahead and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Tyler. I really appreciate it. We're really excited to work with you on this webinar. Like you said, my name is Madison, and I'm the marketing specialist at Lunavi. We're really excited to talk about app modernization today, which is top of mind for many IT executives. In fact, a 2023 Gartner survey found that 46% of organizations plan to increase their spend on application modernization, one of the top 4 areas of overall spending just in the last year for CIOs. Another 50% plan to increase their spend on cloud platforms. Many legacy apps need to be modernized in order to take full advantage of those cloud capabilities, though, or to keep up with upgrades in hardware and, of course, shifting needs of the business itself. And before I hand things back to Tyler, just a quick overview on Lunavi. We are an IT consulting firm and managed services provider that helps organizations like yours create the next generation of technology solutions while empowering your teams through agile practices. Lunavi is one of just a handful of Microsoft Azure Expert MSPs, providing our capabilities across the Microsoft suite of products and services. We've worked with numerous entities to modernize applications. One recent example that we have done was a major regional credit union managing over 3.4 billion in assets. They migrated to a new cloud-based online banking system, and many of their legacy line of business applications, like their teller services, wouldn't integrate with the new platform. Lunavi delivery teams work to update or recreate those services as modern microservices in Azure. But I think that's enough from me now. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Madison. Thanks so much here for sponsoring this event and being here with us today. And thank you to you all for joining us today. My name's Tyler Wheeler. I'm going to be leading our little presentation here today, talking about lots of different stuff here and trying to provide a lot of information to you all as we go along here today. But what I'm also going to be doing here as well is asking you all for some questions, some information from you, really just trying to gauge here, interest levels, what's going on here within your organization, things like that. Really just helps us out here, kind of understanding, type of people coming to our events, all of that stuff here today. So the first question I want to ask here is, we're very much going to be Microsoft specific today. But I do want to go ahead and throw this out as a poll question here for everybody who is attending today. Which cloud is your primary destination? That could be something you're looking towards, something you're already utilizing. Kind of have the big three up there at the top. But if you're hosting applications elsewhere or anything like that, you can definitely let us know here. But where is your main cloud consumption actually coming from here? So really appreciate everybody filling out that poll there as I put those out. Just helps us out a lot as well. As far as talking about competitor products and things like that. There's a lot of similarities across the board. There's a lot of differences here, but today we really want to talk about why Azure is a fantastic option for you as far as all of the different options and different tools that Azure has to offer as far as for your applications. So really appreciate everybody figuring that out here. And what I want to start with here is just kind of talking about now, like, it's so much, we're here to talk about app modernization, but, why customers are really choosing to migrate their applications. And there's, obviously a number of issues that are driving customers here for that. As far as, we have end of support here for software, the urgency for capacity needs, scalability, things like that, software and hardware refresh here. Maybe you're currently outgrowing your existing data centers and you need to possibly want to go ahead and expand, acquire different companies and things like that, as well as their resources. Specifically to app-oriented modernization drivers, we think security is always top of mind, as well as compliance here, the data that your application is dealing with and utilizing, as well as giving your team here of developers in order to really, innovate. And we're going to see here a lot of that has to do with, hosting applications here, utilizing the cloud for that, free up your developers to spend more time innovating their applications rather than maintaining. So that's a huge, huge issue that we see, and one of a big reason why people are choosing to and looking to migrate their applications. And websites really have evolved a lot during the last several years because they're really no longer just a static repository of content that companies can, just update occasionally. A website is a live entity with constant changes and often acts as the main vehicle to deliver digital campaigns and deeper engagement with customers for companies all over the world. And this means that the development of these web applications must be way more agile, not only in terms of doing quick updates to adjust to your business needs, but also providing that a consistent experience across all platforms. And now that every business is utilizing, web applications, multiple ones with internally, externally, all of them need to offer a differentiated experience to their internal employees or their customers to remain memorable, as well as for their customer applications to stay competitive. And there are many ways to provide a high quality experience. For example, application that incorporates AI to provide a more personalized experience, utilizing conversational bots for a faster, more natural interjection with your end users. And it's easier than ever before to do things like this thanks to the cloud services in Azure. So we come here today, this is the buzzword, we hear this all, application modernization. What does it mean? And I kind of want to root us here in this before we move along. Modernization is the act of updating organizational processes, systems, and tools to the most current versions or best practices. So it's not just the technology, it is also the process. And in the context of cloud computing, modernization is the process of transitioning an organization's applications, their processes, their data management to a cloud-first approach. Now, this goal is to improve organizational and technological performance, to enhance the quality of your customer as well as your employee experience, and also accelerate time to market for new offerings and updates. An organization's current software systems and programs might have been great when they were first implemented, but they may not be able to keep pace with the latest technology or the technology we see here on the horizon. So one approach to tackling this challenge is to, start again from scratch, building or buying new apps that are compatible and with the most current technology stack available. And we'll talk more about that, but that, thinking about utilizing things like, IoT event hubs, container applications, AI, everything along those lines. But this approach can be costly, can be time consuming, and the challenge will persist. So even the most current app can be outpaced by its by its technology ecosystem. So instead of starting from scratch by building completely new apps, organizations can modernize the apps they already have as well. It's also important to note that it's often possible and more practical to approach modernizing apps in stages. For example, many organizations start by simply moving their apps from an on-prem data center to the cloud in a lift and shift or an application migration, allowing them to take immediate advantage of the most basic cloud computing features. From there, they can move on to more advanced modernization techniques, such as rebuilding all or some of the parts of their apps and to adopt new capabilities to best practices. So the benefits of app modernization is what I really want to harp on today and really talk about as you see here. The accelerated innovation and time to market that you receive. So when organizations don't have to devote as much time and resource to maintaining their applications and their infrastructure, they can spend more time innovating. Cloud-based tools and services further help to streamline as well your dev processes, your DevOps processes, resulting in faster time to market. Security as well as reliability. So with a cloud-first approach, organizations can use built-in updating and security capabilities to help safeguard their workloads. Other built-in features can include, task automation, for example, for important things like high availability, disaster recovery, backups, as well as performance monitoring. And then we have compatibility and agility. The advantage of modernizing your apps isn't just that they'll be able to work with the most current technology, but they'll keep working even as the technologies evolve. So this seamlessness allows for quick updates and changes to meet current and future business needs. It can also enable automatic scaling so apps continue to work well when there are sudden increases of demand, for example, and to instantly, I should say, reduce costs when there are sudden decreases in demand. We also have the efficiency here of application modernization. So when done thoughtfully, it can be easy, or it could be easier, I should say, to modernize your existing apps than to create new ones from scratch, which though is an option. That way, organizations can build on existing investments rather than sink time and money into something new. App modernization also helps to retain many current processes and maintain business continuity compared to, plugging completely new apps into existing operations. So with that being said, these are what I want to talk about now are really the three main steps here for migration. And we're going to be coming back to these steps and we're going to be talking about this as well as the different approaches to that and where they fit into these migration steps. And those three steps are, whoops, sorry about that, everybody. If they are planning, implementation, and then operations. So in your planning phase, before any migration action is taken, organizations must think carefully about their app migration goals, including their business and IT goals, and define their strategy. This is the time to discover and assess existing apps as well as environments. And I'm going to talk about here some tools inside of Azure that help you in that process. But this planning phase is the most important phase that you are going to face here in your application modernization. And sometimes it's not easy to do alone. So utilizing, cloud service providers, partners, Microsoft partners like Lunavi for those processes to help you with that. We're also going to go ahead and make sure you really find the best fit as far as for your application modernization goals, because there are a lot of options and a lot of different ways to go about it. We'll get to those shortly. Then that second phase is the implementation phase. And during this step, organizations build new skills and begin migrating their apps iteratively. So an iterative approach gives organizations the flexibility to change project scope and strategy as needed. As much time as you spend in that planning phase, there are sometimes road bumps. The process of a migration is not linear. There are going to be things that come up that maybe you could not foresee, or different goals here within your organizations that come up that maybe change the path that you're on. But you want to be able to have that flexibility to change if need be. And that's super, super important in that implementation phase. And then finally, the last phase we have is the operations phase, because app migration is not a one and done kind of deal. Once an organization's migrate their apps, they can use cloud platform services and tools to better secure, govern, manage, and optimize their apps for performance and cost, utilizing the security tools at your disposal inside of Azure. Extending that here to on-prem as well with things like Sentinel, I should say, or implementing new features into your applications. Every really service inside of Azure communicates with each other very easily. It makes it very easy to use, and expand on your applications. So that is super important as we go through. So diving into this planning phase, I want to talk more about that planning phase and talk about here the app modernization pillars. And these are things that I definitely want to go ahead and really hone in on at this time, because a successful application modernization strategy should work towards supporting a framework of organizational goals. And for example, the Azure Well Architected Framework has 5 architectural pillars geared towards organizational goals that can be used for an app modernization. One of those, or those 5, I should say, being starting with the first one, reliability, the ability of a system to recover from failures and continue to function. Then we have security, so to protect your applications and the data that they utilize from threats. Cost optimization, so managing cost to maximize and the value delivered. We'll talk more about cloud costs and things like that as we go along. We have operational excellence, so operation processes that keep a system running in production, and then as well as performance efficiency. That's the ability of a system to adapt to changes in load. So with that being said, in that planning phase, what we want to talk about here are the strategies here that we take a look at as far as for migrating your applications. There's many different ways to go about this. And what I want to kind of dive into are those different strategies. And there's really 6 in total. 2 of them are kind of, in my mind, very, very similar in that regard. Have more to do with how much development you want to put into it rather than the process at place. So we'll talk more about that here as I go along today. But before I dive into those, I do want to go ahead, as I mentioned before, I do have some polls here as far as that I wanted to go ahead and ask everyone. But one of those being here, this next poll. So are you attending this seminar for personal growth or research for company initiatives, or possibly both? I know all developers, even though you're, if you're organization or everything like that, it's good to know things personally, but also you might have a project coming up. You might have some ideas of, you're in the back end of these applications and seeing here like, oh no, like this is going to get bad real soon. And you might have to go to, your hey, listen, like, this is, we need to do something quick. We have some legacy applications. Hopefully they're aware of that as well. So definitely, it could be for personal growth as well. But or if you have some things here in your organization. So this is a question I always like to ask here with really any kind of training, honestly, because it's good to gauge here for us. Awesome. All right. So as we're talking about here in that planning phase, we need to essentially define our migration goals. And in our app migration strategies, um, uh, we have 4 strategies essentially that are distinguished by 2 things. First, those goals that I just mentioned, and second, the need for code changes actually to the applications themselves, because an app migration strategy is defined during this planning step and put in effect then into the implementation step. So we have these different types of strategies. First one being, and I alluded to this before, rehosting, which is sometimes called just a lift and shift. Rehosting emphasizes speed because it requires practically no code changes. So essentially, however, wherever you have your application running here, let's say it's on-prem, for example, or it could be from another cloud provider, another source, you're essentially going ahead and just lifting it and shifting it and running it here as an Azure virtual machine. So they can take their apps from the previous environment and you can migrate them essentially as is to the new cloud environment. You can provision these machines to run the same OS that you're running, whatever you're running for your applications. You can essentially migrate multiple machines at your time as far as an entire infrastructure. And I'll talk more about that here as well as we go along. So second option we have here, and I'm kind of working more towards the idea of, we're thinking of infrastructure as a service more towards platform as a service. So infrastructure being like a virtual machine, for example. And then we have platform as a service, which is more of like your app services, containerized applications, utilizing things like Kubernetes, for example. So the second option is for replatforming. And this approach sits between rehosting and the next one, which we're going to talk about, refactoring. So with replatforming, organizations can make, usually minor code changes so that cloud technologies can be applied to the apps. And there are actually tools for that, which we'll talk about in a little bit later to, actually assess your application and how cloud ready is it. And then, as I mentioned before, we have refactoring an application. We also, you'll hear this referred to as repackaging as well. A couple different options as far as, what we call that. But it takes it a little bit of a step further than replatforming because refactored apps move to the cloud and are, have significant modifications to them. So as to more closely resemble an app developed exclusively from the cloud. Now, what step that is, certain things involved, how much change that you need to make, that's, a little bit of a gray area, honestly. There's no threshold of, how many, what percentage of the code has changed or anything like that. But if you're looking to implement more cloud services into it that will natively work with it, you're looking more at the refactoring option for you. And then you have re-architect. So organizations can modify it and extend app functionality and code to actually scale better as well. So this might be the right approach if an organization really needs to rely on cloud scalability. With running applications on virtual machines, for example, there is scalability there, but it's not the same. It doesn't have the same impact like you would do with containerized applications, for example, or Kubernetes, where you're, spinning up clusters and everything like that, and being able to do that on the fly and having your pods and instantly provision when you need it. The scalability abilities of your PaaS services are going to have a lot more flexibility, I should say, in the scalability. So and also, if an organization decides that an application's functionality, lifespan, or ability to meet future business needs is a little too limited, there are two additional strategies. And this is where it gets into the a little bit of splitting hairs, in my opinion, with these migration strategies. We have rebuilding your application. So that's essentially starting from scratch, essentially, is, if you need to recreate an app utilizing cloud solutions. So instead of continuously modifying your code that may have inherent flaws or limitations, rebuilding gives organizations opportunity to start fresh in the cloud. And then we have replacing an app with an already, a ready-made solution can be faster than rebuilding and can free up valuable development resources. But replacing apps can pose challenges like interruptions to your business processes and limitations to future modernization initiatives. So replacement app may not be designed for all your organization scenarios and use cases, but the developers behind it may not have the resources to customize or expand the app as organizations need to change. So really the big thing is starting fresh with your development, or starting fresh here with maybe some kind of out of the box options as well that may fit your organization's needs but may not be as future proof as you want them to be, because with essentially rebuilding your application or rewriting it, as I could say as well, you have that ability to build that into your application, that future proofs option. So now that we talked about here, as far as within, the different options that you have, what I want to talk about now are the tools inside of Azure, and especially specifically one tool in particular that is going to be essentially your main tool for your migrations to Azure. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this down here, the slideshow, and just kind of hop in this Azure portal real quick, because what I want to show you is going to be your main tool for your modernization needs as far as applications are concerned is a resource or a service, I'm sorry, a service I should say in here called Azure called Azure Migrate. This is your main hub as far as for assessing and migrating your applications that you can utilize. Specifically, mainly, the most important thing is the assessment options here, because Azure Migrate provides a simplified migration, modernization, optimized service here for Azure. They're all pre-migration steps such as discovery, assessment, and right sizing of on-prem resources are included for infrastructure data as well as your applications. And its extensible framework allows for integration of third-party tools, and this is expanding the scope of supported use case. And it really provides the following here. Really assessment, migration, and modernization for your application with a array of different tools. So what I want to take a look at here are some of those tools and how this kind of works and how Azure really helps you get started with your migration at a very high level and does get into some detail, and you have some really amazing abilities with it. And first being here with your discovery and assessment tools. And you'll notice here, there are essentially different migration goals built into Azure Migrate, which provide best practices, documentation, things like that, as well as these assessment tools that we want to go ahead and talk about. So for example, let's say, today I'm looking here at a web app migration, to an Azure app service supporting, PHP, Java, .NET applications, whatever it may be. If I go ahead here, everything inside of Azure Migrate is broken down into projects as far as the scope. And each one of these projects have different tools. And specifically, what you start with here is your assessment tools. And there is really the end all be all here for your application, specifically .NET application migration tools, which is your app service migration assistant. And you can see here, it's essentially included as in this tool, to where we have tools built into Microsoft to go ahead and assess your applications and determine, essentially, I think there's 13 different checks done on an application. So you download the App Service Migration Assistant here to whichever server, whichever machine you're hosting your application on, and you go ahead and run this tool, and it will check your application and see how cloud ready it is, and then give you essentially recommendations as to what needs to be changed for it to be ready to be rehosted, or not rehosted, replaced essentially here, and running as, in this example, a containerized app or a web app here inside of Azure. But it's going to go ahead and give you essentially your Azure readiness, the sizing that you would need here. Let's say if you were migrating, doing a lift and shift to a machine, it'll go ahead and give you recommendations to which size machine here that you need to run on Azure to go ahead and have it run the same as it was currently on-prem, for example. It also gives you cost estimates. So for specifically when you get into costlier things like running certain machines here inside of Azure, it'll give you cost estimates based on the regions you're running them in and things like that. What it's also going to do as well is and this specifically to machines, you have the dependency analysis. So it identifies cross-server dependencies and optimization strategies for moving interdependent servers to Azure for this example, not specifically for the web apps, but these tools here give you those options for that. So a little bit different as far as for the web app, but you do have different migration goals that walk you through different steps. So if I was looking to migrate a server, for example, I could go ahead and see here, I do have Azure Migrate Discovery and Assessment tools for that. Once you run these assessments, you do your planning, and this is a part of your planning phase to go ahead and understand how much is it going to cost, for example. What is going to be, what, depending on what you need, Azure telling you, the right sizing of your applications here and what's going to take to host it. Depending on that, you go ahead and get cost recommendations here. And it's all a part of that planning phase. And then within the same project, you have a tool for migration. So this brings you into the idea of now migrating, and it'll walk you through essentially for whichever kind of goal that you have in mind, how to go ahead and complete that migration. Now, there are little steps along the way and more fine-grained kind of details that you can actually dive into that some of these tools don't essentially dive into it from my experience. But that's why working with someone who has a lot of experience actually migrating to the cloud is super, super important. So hence why, partners like Lunavi want to go ahead and promote on these events and provide you information and let you know that they have these services available to you to help you along the way, especially if it's something that you've never done before. This is their specialization. All right. Awesome. Awesome. So kind of talking about here, if I head back and Azure Migrate is, you can have a free Azure subscription. You can pull up Azure Migrate. You can, this resource is actually completely free. There's certain steps. You can take a look at the steps that you would need to follow. You could run some assessments on your current infrastructure, whatever it may be, on some machines, on your web applications. And you can actually do that free of charge, which is really, really cool. So you're not incurring costs at that point as well. And you can do this planning as well free of charge as far as with those assessments, which is super, super important in that planning phase. You're not putting any, resource or there's no cost associated with that quite yet. Just time is the only cost that you're looking at. All right. So with that being said, and kind of looking into the ideas here of, with costs, especially with this rehosting option, when we're thinking about here, you have, maybe, just doing a quick, simple lift and shift to a virtual machine. I do want to talk about, because they can be pricey, but there are many, many ways to actually optimize costs. And Azure has some benefits here that can help you get the most out of your investment. So with Azure Hybrid benefit to highlight here, you can bring pre-existing SQL licenses, for example, with active software assurance to the cloud and save up to 59% versus other cloud providers. You have reserve capacities as well. So paying for a resource up front, making a 1 to 3 year commitment can save you up to 33% off list price. You can actually combine that with the Azure Hybrid benefit for any kind of licensing that you want to bring over, and you can actually save up to 80% in Azure. I know a lot of people hesitate, a lot of decision makers, hesitate with that because of the costs that are incurred, but it's switching those costs from capital expenditures to operational expenditures, which over time is actually offers a lower total cost of ownership for not just your applications, for your infrastructure as well. You also get here, there's some dev test pricing that you can take advantage of. So let's say you're looking to, develop some new applications. You can actually take advantage of the dev test pricing with an active Visual Studio subscription. You can save up to 55% on that price, and you can keep those machines kind of small, spin them up only during work hours. You have that ability as well to when it's running, things like that. Those are tons of other different strategies here that you can work on. You can also take advantage of, there's a lot of extended security updates for legacy versions of SQL Server as well, with them running on Azure Virtual Machine specifically for your data. So I always want to go ahead and keep that in mind here for everybody. And one thing I do want to hit on as well, kind of talking about this rehosting option, is Azure Arc. Because we have to think about here that your applications itself, your infrastructure is, sometimes limited as to what it can do, depending on and where it can run, depending on compliance and things like that. And Azure Arc, or if you're utilizing other clouds as well, this is a great option for you because Azure offers a unique hybrid and multi-cloud capabilities that give you the flexibility to actually go ahead and innovate and host your applications, run your applications as well. There's Kubernetes inside of Azure Arc because and what Azure Arc does, it enables you to seamlessly extend the Azure control plane to your on-prem data centers, edge locations, and any public cloud. So this is giving you centralized visibility, security, and governance across your resources and locations. It also enables to bring you the tools that you're already familiar with. There's essentially GitHub extensions within Azure Arc as well. You can manage your Kubernetes clusters with GitHub and other PaaS services on those environments as well. And really, it's we like to think of Azure Arc as the bridge that extends the Azure platform to help you build applications and services with flexibility to run across, as I said, different data centers, edge locations, and your other cloud environments. You can develop cloud native applications with a consistent development op process as well as security model. And it runs on both new and existing hardware. It has virtualization and Kubernetes platforms. It has IoT device capabilities as well as integrated systems. So lots of different options for that. Thinking about the idea of this, not necessarily a rehosting, not necessarily that idea of a lift and shift, but giving you some options for that as you go along here. So diving into now more of the options that you have for re-platforming. I'm going to go ahead and start here with one option, Azure Spring Apps, for example, is a fully managed service for Spring Boot applications that let you focus on building and running the apps that your business utilizes without the hassle of managing the infrastructure. So bringing in this idea of a platform as a service where that infrastructure level of your application is going to be managed by Azure. And specifically, Azure Spring Apps makes it easy to deploy those Spring Boot applications to Azure without actually any code changes. So the service manages the infrastructure of Spring applications, so the developers really are focusing on the code first. And it also provides lifecycle management, utilizing comprehensive monitoring and diagnostics, configuration management, service discovery. There's your CI/CD integration, as well as you have blue-green deployments and so much more. And it's really easy to go ahead and set Spring Boot's really just taking care of the plumbing of the application and allowing you to go ahead and deploy your applications rapidly without having to worry about any type of underlying infrastructure that with some of these applications you might be spending more time on than actually developing the application itself or I should say the front end of the application itself, the user experience. And that's what we really want to go ahead and focus on. And what the cloud can provide you is a better experience for your customers and your developers to focus on those things. Kind of taking to the idea of that re-platform activity option as well. You have the option of Azure App Service, which is an HTTP-based service for hosting web applications, your REST APIs, as well as mobile backends, for example. And you can develop in several different languages. It has support for .NET, Java, Node, PHP, as well as Python. And applications run and scale with ease with both actually Windows and Linux-based environments with the Azure App Service. It's giving you the power of Azure as far as security. Easy to go ahead and easy UI for load balancing, auto scaling, automated management. And additionally, you can take advantage of, there's DevOps capabilities as well, such as continuous deployment by utilizing your, favorite DevOps tools like, Azure DevOps, GitHub, Docker Hub as well. For package management, staging environments, custom domains, your SSL certificates, for example. And essentially with an app service and with Spring Boot as well, and this is kind of why I talk about these two together, or Azure Spring Apps, I should say. You pay for Azure compute resources you use, and the compute resources you use are determined by an app service plan you run your applications on. So there's different tier levels of planning, which get into the idea of when you're, running essentially a assessment on your application. You'll be able to kind of see here based on that which plan levels that you need. Are you deploying this across different locations? Is it one centralized location with maybe a little bit of a higher plan for more dedicated compute that the application would need? That flexibility that you're going to get with these PaaS offerings makes it, that's why it's definitely probably one of the most the minimal change with the most cloud benefit is what we see a lot of there for that. So that's what we really like to talk about when we think about the um, re replatforming options as far as our application, migration strategies. All right, I was struggling to find that word here. All right. So I do have a couple more poll questions here. And this is a question here. I've kind of alluded to it, that might be a possibility here, but it kind of gives us a better idea here of, learning about this stuff as well. Are you concerned that your organization's applications or application is or are out of date and in need of modernization? Even if it is already in some capacity utilizing cloud services, there is the ability there, the option that, and also you could feel like that is out of date as well. So that's a very pertinent question here. More than likely, most of us are going to be saying yes as far as bringing us here today, which is super, super important here. So thanks so much for everybody for answering that poll. Really appreciate that. So now I kind of want to get into the idea of, the last few options that we saw here as far as our migration strategies and starting there with refactoring. And specifically, this is kind of the buzzword here that you've heard a lot about, cloud native applications. What do we mean by cloud native? In simple terms, cloud native refers to packaging application code and dependencies into containers, deploying microservices or event-driven functions, and exposing events and APIs, and all managed with DevOps practices and tools. So we're going to see here and talk about these technologies like containers, like Kubernetes, like serverless functions, API management, CI/CD automation. They can really help developers overcome the challenges that they're faced with here today. And rather than, I'm going to get into some technical aspects of it as well, kind of how this, what exactly makes up the idea of a, cloud native deployment. Um, you know, but in the meantime, before that, it's more important for us right now to focus on, what our cloud native applications can help you achieve, putting you and your people into the picture. So specifically, speed of innovation and the speediest of all, I would say. And a cloud native development model brings back the immediacy of creating code. So developers can create something and actually see it run with a transparent feedback loop, empowering your dev team to do the best with velocity. And by enabling self-service resource access and dev process practices, teams can eliminate the risk of failure or delay due to human error as your staff focuses on automated improvements to replace those, mundane admin tasks. And then we have reliability, really core foundational pillar here of the cloud, because applications built with the cloud native approach in mind can help you get the most out of the cloud, which means availability, resiliency, scalability, as well as low latency and the freedom from redundant operational tasks. So using managed services designed for cloud scale and performance, you can now switch cloud goals from IT cost savings to being the engine here of your, organization's growth. And then security as well, kind of always have to talk about that. But between agility and security, there should never be any trade-off. How agile your application is, the security is able to scale with it. And with cloud native technologies, you can automate security checks, run intelligent threat detection and protection in real time, and put fine-grained guardrails at every layer. From the metal to the container image, reducing the risk of breach. So with that in mind, there are tools built into pretty much every Azure service that you have available to you. And we're going to talk about those services that kind of make up this cloud native, architecture and the components of it. But, within that as well, there are overarching security features as well when it comes to, for example, Microsoft Defender, as I mentioned before, Sentinel, that we can go ahead and get real-time threat detection and things like that, monitoring, our clusters inside of Kubernetes, for example, monitoring our databases as well. That extends to your databases in the cloud, from Cosmos, SQL, Postgres, whatever it may be. All of that is available to you. Now, diving more into the architecture here of this cloud native approach, it consists of the following components. First and foremost, kind of the star of the show is the Azure Kubernetes service, which simplifies deploying a managed Kubernetes cluster in Azure by offloading the operational overhead actually to Azure. So it's as a hosted Kubernetes service, Azure handles critical tasks like health and monitoring and maintenance. So when you create a cluster, a control plane is automatically created and configured. So this control plane is provided at no cost as a managed Azure resource abstracted from the user. So you actually only pay for pay for and manage the nodes attached to your Kubernetes cluster. And by default, Azure Kubernetes Service is going to create a virtual network into which the agent nodes are created. So when you create a Kubernetes resource in Azure, this is getting created as well. You can create the network first. You do have that option and that flexibility within Kubernetes and this cloud native approach, for controlling subnet configuration, on-prem connectivity, if you're utilizing that with the application as well as your IP addressing as well. Another huge part of Kubernetes service, obviously, is going to be an ingress. And an ingress server exposes your HTTP routes to services inside the cluster as well. Also to other services, actually, you can utilize it within Azure, but actually within Kubernetes itself, you can expose the clusters to your other Azure resources, making it definitely a little much more secure for you. And then what you utilize here is as well is going to be an Azure load balancer, because after creating your cluster, the cluster is ready to use this load balancer. So once the Nginx service is deployed, the load balancer will be configured with a new public IP that will front your ingress controller. So this way, the load balancer routes your internet traffic to your then you can utilize, you're going to be utilizing data. So, because microservices are stateless and written in write state to external data stores, you can utilize, Azure SQL, Cosmos DB, what have you, many, many different data options here as well. And another huge thing here is Microsoft Entra ID, formerly known as Azure Active Directory, because Azure Kubernetes Service uses Entra ID identity to create and manage other Azure resources, such as your load balancers, for example. And it's recommended as well for user authentication in your client application. So, kind of the basis of your organization as far as your, authentication and authorization is concerned with Entra ID, you can utilize that within Kubernetes. Kubernetes utilizes itself. And then we have our Azure Container Registry for your containers here running inside of Kubernetes. You can also utilize things like that. There are different options for that as well. So there are different options between Azure Kubernetes Service. There is another option called the Azure Container Apps. Now, I like to think that as more of, it's like the upper tier and then kind of the mid tier, because between container apps and Kubernetes service, they are both very similar options, but there's several different factors that you really need to take into consideration, such as the complexity of your application, the level of customization you need, scalability requirements, budget constraints, as well as honestly, I think the biggest one here, sorry about that, is the skill of your team. So a container app inside of Azure, if you want a simple serverless and event-driven way to run containers in Azure, the container app is really, really great for applications that can scale up and down quickly on demand, but you can also run stateful apps as well. So you're not having to worry about managing the clusters or configure load balancers, service discovery, as well as certificates with the container apps. With Azure, you need to, essentially with Kubernetes, you do have a little bit more control over these things, and you do have to set those up as well. So you really want to use Azure Kubernetes Service if you want a full-fledged Kubernetes platform that's going to give you more control and flexibility over your containerized applications. It's mainly ideal here for complex applications that require stateful components, custom networking, or advanced security features. You can run any Kubernetes workload on Azure Kubernetes Service, such as your microservices, batch jobs. You can run your machine learning models as well, or your serverless functions. So it's going to give you that more flexibility into that. But those are very two options when really kind of coming into the idea of this refactoring or rebuilding it as well, kind of taking you to that cloud native approach to where, you can actually just build your application here for the cloud with that in mind. And there are, plenty of documentation out there as well if you're looking to do that, as well as working with the people at Lunavi can help you with that as well. And they have a great little document that we're going to be sending everybody after the event as well. I'll share it with you before we go ahead and finish up here today for that. So one last thing I really want to hit here before we go ahead and kind of start to wrap things up here today is the whole idea, and obviously a very, 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 very important tool when it comes here to our applications, our Azure API management tool. And it's made up of an API gateway, a management plane, as well as a developer portal. So all requests from client applications first reach the API gateway, which then forwards them to respective backend services. So the API gateway acts as the facade to the backend services, allowing API providers to abstract API implementations and evolve background architecture without impacting API consumers. So the gateway enables consistent configuration of routing, security, throttling, caching, as well as observability. So this is just essentially another tool that you really don't have to go ahead and build into your applications. You can use this as a separate application inside of Azure, inside of essentially your cloud infrastructure to, essentially the idea of microservices make these applications a little bit more lightweight, a little bit more flexible and things like that. And that's why I always like to talk about Azure API management for that. It interacts with the service through the management plane, which provides full access to API management services capabilities. You'd be able to go ahead and interact with that plane through Azure tools, including the Azure portal. You can utilize Azure PowerShell, the Azure command line interface, and well as there's actually a Visual Studio Code extension or client SDKs of several popular programming languages. But included in that is the ability to provision and configure API management service settings, define or import API schemas from a wide range of sources, including OpenAI specification, Azure Compute Services, WebSocket or GraphQL backends. You can package your APIs into products and policies and quotas, like quotas or transformations actually on your APIs as well. It has its own essentially insight monitoring engine as well. So once again, kind of giving you, lighter weight applications, kind of spending that and putting that cloud first approach here into your organization and to your applications by utilizing that. And the last little slide I want to hit here, not to dive too much into this, but Azure offers, a differentiated portfolio of managed databases to serve applications of all types. As you see here, we have, Cosmos, SQL, MariaDB, MySQL, all of that available to you here, with high availability, limitless scale, and low latency here for ultimate app responsiveness for you. All right. So what I want to do here is kind of throw out one last poll here before we start to wrap things up here today. And just kind of seeing here from everybody here, for those who are here for your business, does your company have a budgeted application modernization project for this year? Is this something that you are looking to kind of get the show on the road here on sooner rather than later? So we always like to throw that question out when we go ahead and do these presentations. So what I do want to show everybody else as well is on conclusion here of this event, Madison's going to be reaching out to you and providing you here a little white paper from Lunavi, just kind of talking about a little bit more about Lunavi and the processes here as well, and information about what they look as far as for modernizing application with all of their expertise over the years. So what I wanted to do is throw things back here to Madison to speak to anything that possibly you'd see here, as well as give you a chance to thank everybody for joining us today. So Madison, if you want to go ahead and come back on here, that'd be fantastic.
Thanks again, Tyler, for your fantastic presentation. We really appreciate you taking the time. There's some great information here. And just a little bit about our teams. We have expert delivery teams that can walk you through any modernization project you might be looking towards for 2024. If you have any questions, you are welcome to contact us. Like Tyler said, I'll be sending out an email that includes this white page here about modern applications, what we offer as a company, some benefits of working with Lunavi and our teams. But again, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to speaking with you. And Tyler, again, we really appreciate your time and it was a great presentation. I'm going to hand things back to you.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much, Madison. And thanks so much for everybody for joining us here today. Looks like we landed the plane just about on time, a little bit early. So I'm going to go ahead and give everyone a couple moments of your day back there. So really appreciate everybody joining us here today. Thank you so much. Thank you to Madison for being here as well. Great people at Lunavi for sponsoring today's event. And thank you all for your attention. I hope you were able to go ahead and take away some things, get those wheels turning in your brain, thinking about within your organization what it's, the idea of modernizing your applications is, going to start to look like. All right, so we'll go ahead and go ahead and wrap things up here, everybody. So really, really appreciate everybody joining us here today, and enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. So take care.